Alright guys, so I've been thinking. You know how you can download video game ROMs and then play them on an emulator, like on your computer? Yeah, back in the day, it made 10-year-old me super paranoid that one of these days, the FBI will come bursting through my door and take my broke ass to jail. I mean, I was a pretty dumb kid, but can you really blame me for being that scared shitless? I was able to download the entirety of the whole Game Boy Advance library, and each game had like a retail price like 30 bucks. Like, I have a hard time stealing a piece of gum, let alone stealing thousands of dollars worth of video games. But that got me thinking, if I were to go to Nintendo jail, and they let me choose one game of the hundreds I downloaded to play for my entire sentence, which game would I choose? You know, most people would say Pokemon or Zelda, but for me, there's only one game I could truly play for years and not fully complete. You know, aside from that one. The game I would choose is Harvest Moon Friends in Mineral Town. For those who aren't familiar with the series or genre, Harvest Moon is a game where you pretty much just plant crops and just wait for them to grow. That's it. That's all there is. Just kidding! You have to water them first. What it lacks in gameplay, it more than makes up for in sheer amounts of progression. As in, you start out slow and make very little money, but as you progress through the game, you gain upgrades, which makes grinding easier until you can achieve almost full automation. All this, on top of extra things like character dialogue, festivals, events, and even marriage. I am a sucker for games with great progression, farming sim games in particular. And when I heard that Natsume was gonna release a game to commemorate Harvest Moon's 20th anniversary, I just had to play it. More info on them later. And the game was terrible, which is going to be the basis of this video. So I'm gonna start off by saying this game isn't a bad game like how you'd expect a bad game to be. It doesn't have horrible controls, it doesn't have any game-breaking bugs or broken mechanics. No, it's a completely functional game, so it has that going for it. But that's just the problem. Farming simulation games are barely games to begin with. I mean, all you really need for a farming sim game is just to plant a crop and just wait, right? But is it really a game? I mean, imagine playing Cookie Clicker without the cookies. Oh, that was pretty depressing. The reason why games like Harvest Moon work is because they give meaning to the endless cycle of plant, wait, and sell your crops. There needs to be progression to motivate players, and there needs to be variation to break through the monotony. And things such as great artwork or well-written characters will do just that. I know that this can be said about any genre of game, but more so for farming simulation games because of how inherently grindy and mechanically unchallenging they are. And that's where this game falls short. It doesn't make the effort to add any of those previous things I mentioned. And without any of those previous things, it's just a bare bones farming sim game. Let's take a look at the graphics to see what I'm talking about. There is so little variation wherever you go. Everything looks so copy and pasted without rhyme or reason. And whatever little variation they have is just a crappy recolor. The map looks like it was made by a 12-year-old with the latest edition of RPG Maker. All of this, and coupled with this horrible art direction? Seriously, whose idea was it to have this horrible 2D looking map with these undetailed sprites with all these super rounded 3D models? Oh god, they look like better dressed me's. But with the crappy 2D background, it just makes the whole thing look 3 times as worse because of contrast. Imagine if you ripped Steve from Minecraft and put him into Terraria. It just doesn't look right. Just take a look at Friends of Mineral Town. The art in a vacuum looks arguably worse than A Light of Hopes because of hardware limitations. But despite being over 15 years old, it still looks more complete and finished because of the consistency in its art direction. A Light of Hope looks so unfinished. When I first played, I thought this game was in early access. The game not only looks bad because the art is inherently bad, but also because there's a significant lack of detail and polish wherever you go. It's like looking at a pile of shit, then noticing that there's still some bits of undigested corn still stuck inside of it. I don't know. I'm not that much of an artsy person, and they say that art is subjective, so I don't think I can say that this art is objectively bad. I can for sure say that they're lazy though. But do you know what's even more lazy? The characters. Beyond being one-dimensional, almost all of them were recycled from the previous game, Skytree Village, and I just can't understand why. All of the characters are extremely generic and shallow in terms of characterization. Here are some examples. Super crazy mad scientist man, shy and timid glasses girl, fucking Gordon Ramsay. All of these characters just don't mesh well. They're all either too mundane or too eccentric, and it just kills all sense of relatability. It's really hard to make friends with a person when you realize that they're just an NPC. They just lack depth, as in they don't really have any character beyond the tropes and cliches that they portray. Take one of my favorite villagers from Mineral Town as an example. Duke owns the local winery, and on the surface, he looks like an old guy who enjoys what he produces just a bit too much. But as you talk with him and his wife, you learn that their daughter actually got into an argument over Duke's alcoholism and left town because of it. There's even an event where he gotta drag his drunk ass back home and watch him get nagged at by his wife. This game was rated E for everyone. Look, now I'm not saying that there needs to be something tragic or mature about a character for them to be characterized well. It's just, there needs to be some sort of attempt at characterization beyond their character tropes. In Harvest Moon games, you learn more about characters through general dialogue, but aside from that, you can occasionally have interactions with them through events. In A Light of Hope, aside from the 4 romantic events for each of the bachelors and bachelorettes, there isn't any events catering to the villagers to learn more about them. Their focus was solely on the dating sim aspect of the game. If you couldn't marry them, they didn't matter. Sure, some of the villagers had a minor role in the story, but even then, there wasn't much characterization or interactions with them specifically. They just acted like a plot point to progress the story. I mean, just take a look at how many non-romantic events they had in Friends of Mineral Town. It's a no-brainer why A Light of Hope's cast of characters felt so lifeless and empty. In fact, if Natsume really wanted to, they could fix this problem. We live in the age of downloadable content. This means if Natsume really wanted to, they could just patch their game to make their characters more interesting. But after seeing the current DLC they have, it's safe to say that their focus wasn't on making the game better. Remember when I said that almost all of the characters were recycled? Well, only 20 out of 22 of them were reused, while the other 2 are new. And in addition to those characters, they also have another 2 characters exclusively for DLC. That's right, for a small price of $3 a character, you can get Krisu from Steins Gate. I mean, there are similarities, but I guess there could be 2 characters with the exact same hairstyle, that's the exact same color, who both wear the exact same clothes, who both work very closely with time machines. It's just a coincidence. The other character is literally just Sherlock Holmes. They took Sherlock, changed the E to an I, slapped a $3 price tag on him, and called it a day. Yeah, there's no convincing me that this game isn't lazy. While we're on the topic of their shitty use of DLC, they locked basic stuff that should have been a part of the base game. For example, the option to marry certain characters that were already inside the game, as well as locked behind late game tool upgrades. It's just tragic, because all this game really needed to be semi-decent was just a bit more content and detail, but instead we're just being sold stuff that we already paid for. I completed the main story in about 6 hours, and for a $40 game, you'd expect a little bit more. But not everyone's gonna complete the game as fast as you do, everyone goes at their own pace. And that's true. Everyone goes at their own pace. If the game had good pacing, which this doesn't. These type of games are pretty casual, and players usually go about their time achieving the goals they set for themselves. Maybe they want to make some money. Maybe they're chasing after a certain tool upgrade or befriending a certain character. But the thing about A Light of Hope is that there isn't any content to chase after besides their main story. The pacing is directly tied to the story, and players are forced through the story in a linear fashion. Let me explain. In order to progress the story, you usually need to get past certain roadblocks or get certain materials to access an area, which may require a certain tool upgrade. Now, as a player, the goal you previously set for yourself doesn't matter anymore since the game dictates what's a priority for you. And not participating in the story is not an option because there's nothing to do except make money and watch a virtual number counter move up. It doesn't even feel like a story. In fact, I think it's just a cheap attempt at trying to take your base game, splitting it up into different chunks, and adding roadblocks to pretend that you're adding progression. The story leaves players dissatisfied, because they have no control over what they want to do or what reward they get. You're doing some mundane task for some guy you don't even care about to get a reward you don't want. The post-game content is non-existent. Any reward that you get from beating the main story is made completely irrelevant because there's no other content to utilize those rewards. It's like the game is making you dig your own grave with a spork, and then after you're done, it throws a shovel at your head. But really though, I wanted to quit halfway through the story because of how shoehorned in and repetitive everything got. Let me give you the fast version. You have no backstory as to why you abandoned your previous life, so I guess you live here now. Learn that there's only a few villagers, obligatory farming tutorial, grind, do tasks, repair houses, people move in. From where exactly? I don't know. Grind, repair even more houses, collect quest items that progress the story, meet Garth, he's useless, revive the harvest goddess, she's also useless, grind, repair more structures, learn about a magic MacGuffin that Satan has, literally go to hell. Satan's all like, nah, but everyone else is all like, fuck it dude, we got all the magic Oreos, just do it anyways. So you do the ritual and it doesn't work. Until it does. Because friendship? And then everyone's happy that the lighthouse is working because something nature coming back? I mean, sure, I guess. I mean, nothing really changes after the story ends. I think it's all just placebo. There is no story. It just feels like the whole thing was just pushed into the game without thought or effort, and that just summarizes the whole game perfectly. Do you ever get that feeling in a video game? You know the one. All those little moments that make the game feel special, that make the game feel like there was love and care put into it. Things like small details in the backgrounds, minor quality of life improvements, and maybe the occasional Easter egg. Things that aren't completely necessary to the game, but regardless, the devs still worked on it out of love for the creation because they felt like it would have made it better. This game gives the complete opposite feeling. Everything is so devoid of detail and polish. It makes me believe they tried their darn hardest to cut as many corners as humanly possible. For instance, the game's economy is so imbalanced, and as a result, it ruins the pacing of the game, despite it being such an easy fix. Mining is unlockable very early on in the story, and is way too profitable, so it pretty much makes every single other moneymaker in the game completely obsolete. They made farming obsolete in a farming game. How do you even do that? But here, the best tactic is found so blatantly early on in the story. It was such an easy fix too. All they had to do was just adjust the prices of ores and gems. But they didn't even try fixing it, because either they were too incompetent and didn't believe that there was a problem to begin with, or worse, they just didn't care. Speaking about very small and easy fixes, one of the smallest but most constantly annoying things about this game is actually the sound effects. My god, the sound effects in this game are super cheesy. But that's not what I'm getting at here. What I am getting at is the fact that there's no cutoff between sound effects. So on top of all the super cheesy sound effects when doing repetitive actions, they also overlap. Again, it's a super easy fix, but they obviously just don't care. Although, one big detail I was actually surprised with, but eventually let down by, were the character schedules. For those that don't know, in Harvest Moon games, villagers have a set route every day to simulate their daily lives. And usually, there's a numerous amount of variation in their paths, depending on the time, day, season of the year. But the downside is that it's a huge undertaking, or at least I'd imagine it to be. It just seems like a huge headache to manage. But in the end, it is one of the most defining features of a Harvest Moon game. It was such a defining feature, in fact, that despite being such a headache to manage, the devs decided to keep it. Although, that didn't stop them from gutting it by making it in the most roundabout way possible. In A Light of Hope, characters are scheduled to only go to 2 to 3 different locations in their entire 7-day cycle. And in that cycle, there is no variation between the different seasons. They don't even do anything at their respective locations. They either just stand there or wander around aimlessly. But the laziest part of this all is that they don't even walk to each individual location. They just sort of appear there, and when it's time to go, they just fade out of existence. No, I'm not gonna make the reference. So what's the problem here? It all goes back to keeping the player immersed in the game. I really don't want to be reminded that I'm playing this game alone at 2 AM in my parents' basement. The whole point of having character schedules is to make all the villagers feel like a bustling community, with everyone living out their lives. But when you half-ass it, like A Light of Hope did, it makes everyone feel even more robotic and even more NPC-like than if they just didn't add the mechanic in the first place. For reference, Mineral Town had more variance in character schedules in addition to NPCs actually walking to their locations. So there's no reason why A Light of Hope couldn't pull it off. You know, besides laziness. The cherry on top is probably the fact that in A Light of Hope, the NPCs are hard-coded into staying in certain positions during the main story. This guy, for example, is glued outside my house forever. Forever. You know, until I decide to progress the story. Immersion was not a priority for them. They just wanted to get this game done as soon as possible, and it shows. They've completely cut corners on all aspects of the game. The graphics, the characters, the story, the cash-grabby DLCs. But the overlying message I'm trying to get across is, the game was made to be mediocre. So why am I ranting about a game that probably none of you will ever play? The main reason why, aside telling the majority of people who rated this game on Steam why they're wrong, I wanted to bring awareness to farming simulation games, specifically Harvest Moon and what it's become over the years. Harvest Moon was pretty much the big daddy of farming simulation games since 1997. But things changed around 2016 when Marvelous, the original creators of the series, decided to split from the North American localization team Natsume. You see, in Japan, the series is called Bukujo hold on, I took 3 years of Japanese in high school, I can do this. Bukujo Monogatari. Only took me 14 tries, still got it. Over here in the West, it's known as Harvest Moon, but the ones who got to keep the name of Harvest Moon after the split was Natsume. As a result, Marvelous had to rebrand their new games as the Story of Seasons franchise here in the West. You'd think that losing out on localizing Harvest Moon games would have been devastating to Natsume as a company. But Natsume was all like, dude, fuck it, dude. We don't even need you. We'll just make our own games and keep calling it Harvest Moon because we can. And they did. Just to remind you, this was Natsume's third attempt at making a Harvest Moon game. And this was their best one. This piece of shit was somehow their best game. Can you imagine how bad their first attempt was? Here, I'll give you a short little synopsis. Harvest Moon, Minecraft Edition. In an interview in 2016, the CEO of Natsume had this to say after the split.
We had tons of loyal Harvest Moon fans, but we couldn't simply say to those loyal fans that there's no Harvest Moon in the future. Fortunately, we learned and accumulated lots of know-how as to what Harvest Moon fans like and what makes them happy by localizing and publishing Harvest Moon games for the past 16 years. So we took that goodbye as a good opportunity for us, so we could continue to make all Harvest Moon fans very happy.
Well, guess what? I ain't happy. This shit just really pisses me off. Harvest Moon was never going away. It was just being published under a different name. It sounded like the CEO of Natsume was doing the fans a favor by stepping in. But in reality, Natsume is clinging on to all they have left, which is the name of Harvest Moon and the legacy that it left behind. But instead of keeping that legacy going, they wanted to make a quick buck and started to churn out all these low quality games to profit off its loyal fanbase. I want people to discover and love these games the same way I love these games. And that's hard when the most popular title for that genre is putting out absolute garbage. For the benefit of the whole farming simulation genre, it's better if Natsume just stopped making games altogether instead of pushing out games that have no inspiration or effort put behind them. In the complete opposite spectrum, Stardew Valley is a game I hold dear to my heart, not only because it's undoubtedly the best farming simulation game to date, over 400 hours played by the way, but because I could feel the passion for the genre oozing from the dev who made it, Concerned Ape. You can tell that he played the older Harvest Moon games because he took elements of what made it fun and so enjoyable and expanded upon it in different ways the original devs just couldn't even match even after 15 plus years. All of this, on top of only being $15 with multiple free content updates. Give this man the Nobel Peace Prize. My obsession for Stardew Valley aside. For real though, I could write a whole essay on why it's so goddamn good. I also love the Harvest Moon series. That's why I made this video. If I didn't, I wouldn't be wasting my time talking about such an obscure game. I didn't like the way Natsume was treating the series or its fans. And at this point, I just want the whole series to die. It's been so long overdue, but I don't think Natsume is gonna let go anytime soon. They already have a new $30 puzzle game lined up with the Harvest Moon name plastered all over it. Natsume claims that this game, and I quote, encompasses 20 years of the spirit that has made the franchise what it is today. Well, the franchise today doesn't have the charm that it used to, and as a result, it's almost dead. And this game encompasses everything that Natsume has done to make that happen. On the bright side at least, a new Story of Seasons game based on Friends of Mineral Town actually came out in Japan last month, and it's going to be released in English very soon. I mean, I hope at least. The game looks very promising because they're adding numerous gameplay and quality of life improvements from the original. The main selling point for me is how faithful to the original. Duke, what did they do to you? Oh god, they're here for my pirated copy of Hamtaro Ham Ham Heartbreak.